Let me start off by saying I move around a lot, bouncing between Southern California and Arizona. Back in December 2015, I was still living in Southern California, staying at my grandma's apartments. To fill my time and improve my people skills, I took up a part-time job at Toys R Us. Now, I'm a 24-year-old girl, and I've got pretty extreme social anxiety, making it tough for me to talk to people. So I figured this job would help. Another important thing to mention, my grandmother is on a government program with reduced housing cost and has a 2-bedroom apartment ever since my grandfather passed. But due to the annual checks that are complex, she is supposed to be the only inhabitant of her dwelling. So technically I was not supposed to be living there with her. But she liked the help and the company, and I liked being rent-free. Now, since I wasn't supposed to be there, I technically had to sneak around and most definitely couldn't park on the parking grounds of the complex, as it would draw attention. There was a cemetery across the street from the complex, and then half a mile of houses leading down the street next to the cemetery, along which most of the visitors of the house, apartments nearby, including myself, parked. I was getting free rent and staying with my grandma, which was awesome to me. If a man had usually parked half a mile away from the complex, I didn't mind the walk. So all was well for a few months from when I got the job in October. A scary incident with a stalker at work. I'll leave that story for another time. But eventually they started putting up night shifts, which I definitely did not mind since I tend to be a night owl. Also, if you've ever been on a close shift at any retail store, you know you can easily stay an hour or overtime after the store closes, doing rush jobs. During the holiday season, it was early December at the time, I ended up getting off work past 2 a.m. Around this hour, at this time of year, in this part of SoCal, the mist gets unbearably thick to the point of having to drive 30 miles per hour down the highway with your brights on and still being unable to see a foot or two in front of the car. Tonight was one of those nights. I wasn't too bothered by it at that time, but it does set off my anxiety a little bit. So by the time I got home, it took me nearly 20 minutes to find a parking space. I was pretty anxious. Of course, with my luck, I parked at the very end of the half-mile stretch. Now it's kind of a tradition of mine to get out of the car, close the door, and linger near my car for a minute. I audibly stretch a bit, and sometimes complain if today sucked, etc. It's just a little habit thing I do, and tonight was no different. Immediately after, I tucked my purse under my arm, turned on my phone flashlight, and stuck it in front of my face to see where I was going, because the fog was so thick I couldn't see a foot in front of my face. I had walked in this weather many times before, so I knew my way home, a straight-shot walk for half a mile and a sharp turn left at the end of the cemetery, then crossing the street and into the gated complex. So I was on my merry way, until I heard a loud, almost obnoxious cough and footsteps. My alert mode set in, and I instantly started walking faster and trying to be quieter about my movements. Call me paranoid, but I've had a fair number of let's not meet moments, and I certainly wasn't keen on meeting a stranger walking behind me, especially given the fact that I can't see a foot in front of my face, even with streetlights and my phone light. This continues for a few minutes with the occasional cough behind me, and then I hear a whistle, the kind of catcallers do, which worried me because, one, you can't see anything since you can't see anything in this weather. I assume the person is purposefully intimidating me, at which point I give up on walking and break into a run. The steps behind me break into a full-blown run, and I hear panting. Clearly the dude isn't in the best shape. Neither am I. But the run didn't wind me as bad. By now I'm speed walking next to the cemetery, and for some godforsaken reason I panic. My mind tells me it would be better to duck into the cemetery and hide instead of walking the straight shot home. Had there been no fog, I would have had a clear view of my grandma's apartment from the area in the cemetery where I stood. I quickly hid and crouched behind the entrance post to the cemetery gates, and I knew I messed up because his footsteps stopped, and I can tell he knew I was hiding because of the lack of audible footsteps. I crouched there for what seemed like 10 minutes, too scared to turn on my phone for fear of him being close enough to see the light and find me, and too scared to make a run for it for fear that he was intently listening out for me. I had figured out he was standing probably 5 to 10 feet from where I was at the entrance driveway to the cemetery right before the gates, which was confirmed when, after a minute, I heard his voice say, "I know you're there, sweetheart." I heard the distant sound of a lighter being struck and then smelled cigarette smoke. I figured the dude was focused on the cigarette, and I made a run for it across the cemetery, somehow not tripping over any graves, all while intently trying to listen behind me. The cemetery's main entrance was wrought iron fencing, but the back and the right end is wooden. One serves as a separator between the cemetery and the backyard of various houses, and the other side, which is in front of my grandmother's apartment, is chain link. There was no other entrance or exit to the cemetery, but I know the chain link fence doesn't go all the way to the ground. So I laid on my stomach, pushed the fence out and up, went across, and ran directly across the street to my grandma's house, pounding on her door until she opened. I don't know how this dude found me. He must have been standing around nearby as I parked and heard me complain to myself loudly when I got out of the car. But either way, that was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. So creepy stalker guy in South San Diego who likes to come out of the mist and terrify women at 3 a.m. Let's never meet again. A few years ago, I was still living in my childhood home down in California. I had just inherited my family home, and my cousin decided to move in with my husband and me while she was attending a college nearby. Both my cousin and I were working at a Lego store at the time, but I only worked mornings, and my husband and cousin worked nights. So, there were many nights when I found myself alone. A couple of weeks before this incident, I had been taking some things out of my car when I noticed a strange brown van with no back windows parked across the street. As I was putting my stuff in the trunk, the man in the van started making weird noises at me. I turned to see if I could get a good look at his face, but his black Giants baseball cap was pulled down really far. Thinking it was just a creepy guy, I flipped him off and went back into the house. About 2 hours later, I needed to go somewhere, and when I got in my car, I saw that the same brown van was following me. I tried to shake him off by turning onto different streets, but he kept following me down all of them. Finally, I turned onto the road where my father-in-law lived, thinking if the guy tried anything, I could run there and be safe. When I pulled my car over in front of my father-in-law's house, the van slowly drove by. I looked into the van, and the man put his hand into a gun position, pointed at me with his index and middle finger out, and his thumb pointed up and said, "Hey!" really loudly. After that, he sped off. Now, I've always been a little leery of staying home alone. My house had always given me the creeps because of how poorly lit it was, especially at night. So, when I was alone at night, I usually just stayed in the kitchen because it was the brightest room. That night, I was watching a TV show on my computer in the kitchen when all of a sudden, I heard banging on the front door and the handle jiggling. It startled me for a moment until I looked at the time and saw that it was around 10 p.m., and my cousin was going to be coming back from work at that time. I got up and opened the door, but there was nobody on the porch. I shouted my cousin's name, but there was still no response. I called my cousin's cell, and immediately she was like, "Oh hey, I'm on my way home from work right now." Before I could say anything else, there were 3 extremely loud bangs on the door that connected to the kitchen and the garage, and the knob was shaking violently. I slammed the door closed, locked it, and chained it, then ran to my room. My aunt called me while my cousin called the police, and I stayed under a blanket until my cousin arrived. When she came to get me, I was led outside to talk to the police. I tried to explain what happened, but the officers alongside my house were distracting me. They opened the gate and saw that the door to my garage, which we always leave locked, was wide open. All of the officers in the area pulled out their guns and went into the garage, but nobody was in there. Afterward, the police told me it was probably some kids messing around, but if I ever got scared at home, I should just call them, and they'd send someone out. About a week later, I was watching something in my living room with my cousin and my husband when I was passing by the window next to the front door. I realized there was a guy wearing the same baseball cap as the guy in the van standing outside on the sidewalk, staring at the house. When he noticed me watching, he immediately locked eyes with me and slowly gave me the creepiest smile I had ever seen. I turned and yelled for my husband to go out there, but when I turned back around, he was gone. I should mention that the baseball cap in question is really generic, and a lot of Giants fans wear it, so I can't say it was the exact same guy, but it felt like it was. 3 days after that, I was home alone at night again. I was on edge but trying to ignore it, telling myself I was going to be okay. I was baking cookies in the kitchen when I thought I heard a knock at my sliding glass door. My whole body tensed up, and I slowly turned toward the door. The lights in the backyard were off, and the kitchen ones were on, so the glare on the window made it impossible to see if there was anyone outside. Everything was silent for at least a few seconds before someone banged on the door again. I screamed, but felt paralyzed in fear. The person ran onto the deck from the sliding glass door to the 2 windows in the living room and started knocking on them as well. Then they came back to the sliding glass door, trying to open it. Finally, I came to my senses, grabbed my keys, and ran outside into my car. I locked myself in and dialed 911. We sold our house shortly after that, and to this day, I still have a hard time staying alone, even though I'm now 2 states away. Hello, everyone! If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to create more content you'll love. Thanks a million. And if you've just subscribed, please drop a comment saying I subscribed. We'd love to welcome you to our community.